So this is Lord of the Rings, Techno-Necromancy. So yours truly is the new Lord of the Rings. Being the world's expert in remote sensing, I simply learn how to make the one ring. And how can you do that? Well, via CERN and quantum computers and the Borg that I use to collapse the quantum wave function of the multiverse you've found. And then, of course, you can export the ring, all powered by the vermin that watched and read Lord of the Rings. So they've all agreed to eternal torture in Omega Hell to power my one ring. Thank you very much. And in the trilogy by Tolkien, Sauron was called the Necromancer because he was a master of necromancy. So what's necromancy? Necromancy is simply using the dead for black magic. And we're going to go into using the dead for the most horrendous black magic possible. So those of you of a nervous disposition or under 18 should definitely not watch. Now, let's show you a bit on necromancy. So this is all about necromancy, but the old-time necromancers didn't have CERN and the ability to trawl through the multiverse and then use the Borg to collapse the quantum wave function with their conscious field, and of course their scalionics, leptionics, torsionics, and more. But of course modern physicists are 100 years down the wrong path, so are in my oubliette, and I'm feeding them lots of excrement because all they're good for is growing mushrooms in the dark pit of the great Dark Lord. So now we've got CERN, we can go through the multiverse, but as I explained, not only that, we can trawl through the noosphere where we've got Lord of the Rings, Middle-earth, which according to Tolkien was real, and he visited it, so he was remotely viewing a multiverse which he wrote about in Lord of the Rings. So he looked through his writings, he said it was all real. Now, what's real? What's real is what you put Higgsfield on. Therefore, if you have the information, and remember I got the Jews to steal my book to do the Wheel of Time, so I could Jew them and bring all those powers to myself as the Great Dark Lord. But likewise, since the age of 9, I've always wanted to be the Lord of the Rings. Did you want to be a fireman? No. Did you want to be an astronaut? No. I wanted to be the Lord of the Rings. And of course, unlike Sauron, who had to fight in battle and get his ring chopped off by a human, this new Lord of the Rings doesn't fight. He has massive armies to fight for him. He's got gigantic armies. Who do the Ukrainians call orcs? The Russians. You can look. So the Russians are part of the army. We've got Chinese. We've got the Iranians, we've got the North Koreans, we've got the Pakistanis, we've got the Turks. So I've got a big army. And of course, I wouldn't fight in battle because I prefer using techno-magic to get rid of my enemies. There's no point trying to get in a wrestling ring with Hulk Hogan in his prime, because that's not my forte. My forte is Psi and developing it now into techno-magic, and in this case, Techno-Necromancy. So let's give you a taste of necromancy, because of course the only good cameraman is a undead cameraman. And as everyone else would attest, my cameraman is one of the Walking Dead, is he not? He looks like one.
Practice that has both fascinated and horrified humanity throughout history. It involves summoning the spirits of the dead and communicating with them to learn about the future and uncover hidden knowledge. It's what's thought of as black magic or death magic, the type that's dangerous, taboo, and should be avoided. But necromancy wasn't always viewed this way. In fact, it was so common in ancient times that you can find necromantic rituals in Homer's Odyssey. The word necromancy comes from the Greek words nekros and manteia, which literally means divination from the dead. The idea was that because the dead were in another realm, they had access to knowledge unknown to us, from the past, present, and future. Necromancy traditionally involves rituals, spells, incantations, symbols, and the invocation of spirits. These could be mundane or grotesque, depending on the purpose. Some practices involved wearing the clothes of the deceased or sitting for days without moving in places like a graveyard or the home of the dead person. Sometimes it even involved mutilating and eating the corpse as a way to call the spirit. If the person had died a violent or premature death, it was thought that the corpse contained some amount of unused vitality. This is why the practice of using parts of corpses when creating charms became an important technique of some forms of witchcraft. The practitioners of necromancy were skilled magicians who would use a consecrated circle to protect themselves from the anger of the spirits. There are stories of necromancers who have used this form of magic to find lost treasures and learn powerful secrets. Some used it to seek power, knowledge, healing, and protection. Some turned to necromancy for personal reasons, such as to bring back a lost lover or to communicate with deceased relatives. In this way, necromancy was a thread in the fabric of many cultures, albeit a hidden and dark thread. The origins of necromancy go far back to ancient times. It was a fundamental part of the beliefs of ancient Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, and Babylonians. But in these cultures, it didn't carry the stigma that it carries today. Rather, it was a ritualistic practice intertwined with spirituality and religion. One of the earliest and most well-known examples we have of necromancy comes from Homer's Odyssey. In this account, the sorceress Circe tells Odysseus to perform a necromantic ritual, known as a Nikia, to summon the spirit of the dead prophet Tiresias, so he could provide him guidance on how to journey back home. Nikia was a common practice in ancient Greece, where a ghost would be summoned and questioned about the future. So, this account gives us an idea about the broader cultural and religious attitudes of the time towards death and the afterlife. Similarly, the Egyptians believed in the power of communicating with the dead. There are examples of divination by the dead that appear in the Demotic Papyri, a collection of ancient Egyptian magical texts. These provide instructions on how to call various types of dead spirits and also how to send them back. The priests and magicians of the time were well versed in rituals and spells that involved interacting with the spiritual realm. This was about maintaining balance, honoring the dead and learning from their wisdom. It wasn't so much about summoning spirits for control. However, Judaism and Christianity has always condemned necromancy and consulting with the dead. For example, the book of Deuteronomy lists necromancy among the practices that are detestable to God. Let no one be found among you who is a medium or spiritist or who consults the dead. In chapter 28 of the first book of Samuel in the Bible, there is the story of the witch of Endor, a figure who calls upon the spirit of the prophet Samuel at the request of King Saul. While the witch herself doesn't intend harm, Saul's consultation of her and the resulting prophecy lead to his downfall, showing how necromancy was seen as a dangerous art with potentially harmful consequences. By the Middle Ages, the church intensified its crackdown on necromantic practices, increasingly associating them with witchcraft and black magic. This shift occurred partly because of a rise in superstition and religious beliefs, particularly within Christianity. There was a deep-seated belief in witchcraft, necromancy, and heraldry, and therefore a need to stifle these so-called dangerous practices. There was also a growing belief that communicating with the dead was an act of consorting with demonic forces, rather than spirits. The church began to categorize necromancy and other forms of magic as heretical and akin to devil worship. Interestingly, this was also when Goetic necromancy began to grow. This is a branch of necromancy that relates to summoning and controlling demons, as outlined in the grimoire, the Lesser Key of Solomon. Some of these demons,
which all these 72 divisions of Goetia, or Goetic demons, are explained in my magic videos. All deleted by the Judases and put back up again by my brave little team here. Say thank you to my brave little team. Thank you, brave little team. So they're back and up, and you can go through the 72 Goetia at your leisure. And if you've got the Stargate rental, you can then use CERN, the Borg, and quantum computers, plus AI, to conjure up via techno-magic the Goetia, and then send them to do dastardly things to anyone on my list. And Kalki has got a very large list, which is all Westerners, all billionaires, all trillionaires, all Rothschilds, Rockefellers, royal family, all Western military and intelligence agencies. So that's a pretty big list. And of course, you can also send the Goetia to pull them into the reality where their kill shots remote manipulate them. So you can see the mixing of psychic warfare now with necromancy and black magic and the conjuring of the Goetia. Isn't it exciting?
Yes.
are said to have the power to bring deceased souls before the practitioner so that the practitioner could ask whatever question he wished. Goetic necromancy diverged from the traditional form, but it heavily draws from it. It wasn't devil worship, but it did involve demons and the dead. And so, necromancy, once seen as a means of divination or spiritual communication, became stigmatized as a dark and forbidden form of magic. In many places, necromancy was made illegal. As this viewer of our channel puts it, it was a dying art. But in reality, it continued in more secret forms and has seen a resurgence in modern times. While necromancy is no longer widely practiced as it was in ancient or medieval times and tends to hold
It is now. Get your Stargate rental and go on to the magic videos and start conjuring up the Goetia to make you rich, give you knowledge, and do horrible, horrible things to your enemies, even remotely manipulate them. Because the only good Westerner is a remotely manipulated Westerner, and I'm not talking about tweaking their nipples.
For forbidden dark art, there is still interest in this field. In certain occult communities, practices echoing traditional necromancy can still be found. These are aimed at communicating with the spiritual realm, although often in more symbolic contexts than as genuine attempts to communicate with the dead. You could also argue that modern mediums practice a form of necromancy, as their aim is to establish communication with the spiritual realm. While these practices are not typically classified as necromancy in a traditional sense,
So why do they use a crystal ball? Because crystal has a piezoelectric effect. That means when you squeeze it, it gives off electricity, produces the 4 vector, and your conscious field can use that 4 vector to get into the 5th dimension, because according to Theodore Kaluza, 1926, light is gravity in the 5th dimension. Hence, that's why you use a crystal ball to get into the corridors we saw on the Ariana Grande and Taylor Swift videos. And you go along the corridor till you get to the doorway where you can contact the dead. Simple as that.
contact with the deceased. But they operate within a different ethical and cultural framework and tend to focus on personal spirituality and healing, rather than on the more arcane objectives historically associated with necromancy. There's some...
As I say, I wouldn't recommend getting the dead to try and heal you, because all they do is put you into their state, which of course is dead as a dodo. So, not a good idea. And whatever they died from will then infect your quantum field. That's why you can send the dead, and we'll go over it in more detail. You can send the dead to a target, and their quantum field and consciousness will infect the target to remotely manipulate them. So if they died of cancer, you can send one of the dead to be bilocated into the death spot of the victim. So the victim's death spot is a conduit for death force from that type of dead, and some similarity, all the people that died of cancer will be feeding that death spot, and then of course you can feed the quantum field and consciousness of the dead person into the assemblage points and go through the remote manipulation, taking it to the death spot and then into the gap in order to remotely manipulate them, so that they then are self-similar to the dead that you possessed the former living person with. All done with the Stargate rental using CERN, AI, quantum computers and the Borg. Say thank you, Department of Defense. So you can see now we're taking necromancy into Techno-Necromancy, where it's real scientific, and the effects of the quantum field and conscious field of the dead afflict our targets to remotely manipulate them.
Captures the imagination, whether you're for it or against it. At its core, it touches on the profound mysteries of death and the afterlife, themes that have intrigued humanity throughout history. There are numerous examples of this forbidden practice in popular culture and media, from ancient to modern times. For example, Shakespeare often included aspects of necromancy in his works, including Hamlet and Macbeth. Other popular examples include Game of Thrones, where the Night King wields the power to raise the dead.
And of course, as we've explained, anyone who's watched Game of Thrones or bought the book or been associated with its production, etc., is overgehelized and eternally tortured to source level to feed my necromancy. So you can gain necromantic power from those scenes of Game of Thrones. And Game of Thrones wasn't watched by many people, was it? So there won't be much power there, will there? Oh, I think not. I think there's loads of power there. So you can see in Techno-Magic, we're not using our own, and never ever as vampires use your own scalionics, torsionics, leptionics, Higgs field for psychic warfare or black magic or necromancy. You use the victims. So if the victim has ever watched Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or read the book, then of course they've agreed to the contract of me using necromancy on them. Quite a nasty way of doing it. And of course, in the Wheel of Time, the great Dark Lord of yours truly raises the Forsaken from death after they've been killed. So Wheel of Time supplies loads of necromantic power to the Lord of the Rings.
Resurrection Stone, and the eerie Inferi, who are zombie-like puppets. These stories captivate
And of course we've got Harry Potter. And the lovely children and other people that read those books all sucked dry and agreeing to my necromantic contract by buying the books, going to the cinema and watching it on their devices. Thank you very much. Can you imagine the amount of power that's available for necromancy? Excellent.
Boundaries between life and death. This widespread representation of necromancy in media reflects a continued fascination with the idea of communing with the beyond, a concept both alluring and unsettling at the same time. It represents the human desire to understand life's mysteries, cope with the fear of death, and find comfort in the possibility of an afterlife. What do you think? Does necromancy have positive aspects?
Right. So we've got another spatialized video about CERN detecting another multiverse.
Pair. The first target, decoherence. Quantum decoherence is what causes a system to lose its quantum properties and behave classically. By varying decoherence factors, temperature, vacuum fluctuations, environmental noise, CERN can test whether the shifter effect emerges only near specific thresholds. In other words, is there a sweet spot where the quantum boundaries between universes become more permeable? They're also planning to adjust lattice configurations in the simulation itself. By changing the granularity, dimensions, and symmetry-breaking parameters of the quantum field lattice, researchers hope to identify weather-phase boundaries, the points where one stable state transitions into another, play a key role in enabling the shift. This would be a massive clue, tying the anomaly to fundamental topological transitions. But perhaps the most ambitious step is this: integrating quantum gravity corrections. Until now, most particle physics simulations have treated gravity as negligible, understandable, given its weakness compared to the strong and electroweak forces. But if the anomaly involves cross-reality interaction, then gravity might be more than a minor player. It could be the key. Theorists suspect that subtle gravitational fluctuations, especially at Planck scales, could act as a coupling agent between universes. In other words, quantum gravity might be the bridge. By baking higher order corrections into their equations, terms from loop quantum gravity, string compactifications, or even holographic duality, CERN aims to see if the shift probability increases or decreases with specific geometric or energetic constraints. If the data reveals a correlation, it will mark.
And the good thing is, since I can travel the multiverse, I simply find the CERNs where they keyed into the sweet spot and have opened portals to other parts of the multiverse, and I can simply hijack their systems via quantum computers, the Borg, and of course the wetware that runs CERN in these other multiverses, to then not only find the multiverse where every one of those on my calculus dies from psychic warfare, but actually then use CERN, or the CERNs in the multiverse, to then bring that timeline strand into this timeline, so that every single targeted individual on Kalki's list is remotely manipulated by yours truly and kicks the bucket on demand. So you can see we're not going after one, but all of them, thanks to Techno-Necromancy. Isn't it exciting, cameraman?
That is.
Gravity has shown measurable influence in a controlled lab experiment, a holy grail moment. From theory to tech. Let's assume for a moment that the replication tests succeed. The anomaly occurs again, multiple times under varying conditions. Now it's no longer an anomaly, it's a pattern, a mechanism, a phenomenon. At that point, the question becomes, can we control it? If the shifter effect can be reliably reproduced, scientists will race to map its parameters: field strength, energy thresholds, timing windows, entropy limits.
And of course, I found the timelines where they found it, and I'm using them 24/7 to remotely manipulate everyone who's a targeted individual by Kalki. So you'll be seeing lots of remote manipulation, because the only good targeted individual is a remotely manipulated individual, who of course, the more on my target list are remotely manipulated, the more necromantic force I collect from their expiring. So you can see it goes up exponentially. So 1 or 2, and then 10, then 100, then 10,000, then 1 million, then 100 million, then billions. So you can see how it works. It's positive feedback. The more targeted individuals are remotely manipulated, the more death force I have. For necromancy, the more death force I have, the more targeted individuals are remotely manipulated to provide me more death force. And it keeps iterating up and up.
Door opens to something wild: shifter engineering. Imagine being able to tune a system's decoherence profile until it enters the leakage zone. Then imagine using that moment to encode quantum information, data packets, messages, perhaps even entangled qubits.
What about the quantum field of the dead and the consciousness of the dead, which can then be bilocated via the remote manipulation protocols we had in the previous videos into the targeted individual, to then link them to the timeline where they expired from remote manipulation via Techno-Necromancy. You're beginning to see the profound use of this weapon system. Who cares about nuclear weapons when you can simply take out whole populations with Techno-Necromancy, thanks to CERN quantum computers and the Borg. Remember, the Borg are the ones that make the strand of the multiverse, the universe you found, or that strand within it that you wish to export through these doorways and entwine with the former universe. They're the ones that make it collapse. So you need the Borg. AIs can't do it. Quantum computers can't do it. We need the Borg, and of course we've got at least 6 billion Borg, and then we've got the lobotomized zombies, the ones that had the nanobots up the nose.
Another realm. Not metaphorically, literally. This would be the first form of inter-universal communication, the cosmic equivalent of sending a message in a bottle, across the layers of existence. And that's just the beginning. If information can travel, what about particles? What about energy? Could we someday build machines that extract energy from vacuum fluctuations caused by reality intersections? Could we offload entropy into another universe to keep our own systems running longer? It's speculative, it's dangerous, but it's not impossible. And that alone makes it revolutionary. Implications for physics and beyond. If shifter events are real and controllable, the implications stretch far beyond technology. The entire philosophical foundation of modern science shifts. Up to now, every law of physics, gravity, relativity, quantum uncertainty, was thought to apply universally. But if realities can intersect, then physical law becomes a local rule set, not a cosmic constant. What's real here might be optional elsewhere. In this new framework, the multiverse is not an abstract possibility. It's a measurable reality space. Different rules, different histories, different outcomes, accessible, if only momentarily, through quantum edge effects. And here's the wild part. This might explain phenomena we've never been able to pin down. Dark matter? Maybe it's mass from a neighboring universe that gravitationally overlaps with ours. Quantum entanglement? Perhaps it's just local evidence of two particles sharing multiversal entanglement. Time as symmetry? What if time flows differently across layers and we're seeing the effects of inter-universal drift? Suddenly, unanswered questions become solvable mysteries. And with each answer, the universe grows less like a machine and more like a multidimensional network. A neural mesh of realities, firing, linking, evolving together. A new kind of destiny. There's one last layer to this, one that goes beyond physics, beyond simulation, even beyond science. If we learn to trigger the shifter effect, if we gain the ability to speak, send, or sense across the veil, then our place in the cosmos changes forever. We are no longer confined to this one realm. We are not isolated observers. We are participants in a multiversal civilization, one that may stretch across infinite worlds, infinite timelines, infinite dreams. And just like that, human destiny expands, not into...
And of course, who would be able to use this at all of the human race, because he's the world expert on manipulating the conscious field, which we explained before. It would be Tim Reefer, the #1 world expert on remote sensing. Isn't that exciting? Not very exciting though for the targeted individuals, is it? Being remotely manipulated. And I'm not talking about tweaking their nipples.
Space, but into possibility itself. We used to look up and wonder if we were alone. Soon we may look sideways and realize we never were. And it all starts with one glitch, one flicker of impossible data, one shifter. What comes next is everything. We began by asking a radical question. Can a quantum simulation reveal proof of a parallel universe shifter? A phenomenon that doesn't just hint at other worlds, but actually interacts with ours in real, measurable ways. Now, after walking through the layers, CERN's...
Which means, of course, you can bring, if you're able to do multiversal remote viewing, you're able to find anything you fancy in the multiverse. And then, of course, you need to be able to remotely sense, because you need to understand all that knowledge. It's no good finding alien technology or alien psi-ware, because, of course, unless you can remotely sense and use the conscious field to steal their conscious field so that you know everything they know and can then export it from one part of the multiverse to here, and then of course intermix so you have a non-locality of physical laws in this reality, e.g. I can do techno-magic, but NATO and the Americans never can. And every time they try and copy me, all they do is sign the contract for my Techno-Necromancy because they're targeted individuals. Their conscious fields and quantum fields have been totally corrupted by me and this technology, so that they are forever locked out of this technology and are only there as torture toys to be remotely manipulated. In fact, they're walking, talking zombies, the walking dead.